There are moments in life that feel less like time passing and more like a line being drawn in the sand, separating the person you were from the person you are about to become. For me, that line was drawn on Mother's Day, amidst the scent of freshly bloomed jasmine and the jarring arrival of a silver car that cost more than my entire street. My name is Sybil Finch, and I've spent 72 years in this small, historic home, quietly living a life rich in history, not in zeros. My world was defined by the pages of books I once taught, by the slow rhythm of the changing seasons, and by the memories of a husband who taught me that true wealth is invisible. It was a simple, dignified life, and honestly, I was content. Content, that is, until my son, Thaddeus Cole, arrived. Thaddeus, my little boy, had grown into a titan, a tech billionaire whose company's valuation I couldn't even mentally calculate. He stepped out of that sleek machine looking tired but powerful, followed by his wife, Zephyra Sterling. Zephyra, the name always felt too light, too airy for the calculating presence she held. She was draped in silk, and a cloud of imported perfume that hit the warm Texas air with aggressive confidence. When they walked through my door, bringing the cold, sharp efficiency of their world into my quiet haven, my heart always tightened, but never before had it actively frozen. Thaddeus handed me a massive, gorgeous bouquet of exotic flowers, the kind that look flawless, but lack the deep, earthy smell of the roses I grow myself. He kissed my cheek, his eyes distant. Already halfway back to the market numbers and meetings that defined his week. "Mom, you look wonderful," he said, and I knew he meant it in the abstract, the way one might admire a well-preserved antique. He settled onto my old floral sofa, pulled out a glass of the artisanal juice he'd brought, and then, in a voice as casual as asking about the weather, he dropped the bomb. "Mom, is the $8,000 Chloe gives you every month enough? I just want to be certain, with your property taxes and medications, that you're comfortable. I set up that monthly transfer 6 months ago, and I told Chloe to personally manage the delivery so you wouldn't have to deal with the bank." The world went silent. Absolutely silent. The hum of their expensive car, the chirp of the birds, the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. It all dissolved into a low, ringing white noise. $8,000. Every month. 6 months. Do the math quickly as a historian catalogs dates or an accountant balances a ledger. That's $48,000. A sum that wasn't just substantial, it was existential. That money would secure my future, fix the persistent leak in the roof, replace the failing heating unit, and cover the rising costs of the essential medication that keeps the engine of this old body running smoothly. Instead, I'd been clipping coupons, skipping community dinners, and praying the Texas cold wouldn't kill my old furnace. I stared at the spot where the transfer should have landed, a vacant space in my reality. Where was it? My hands tightened around the delicate vase that held his opulent bouquet. Zephyra, catching the sudden shift in the air, offered a tight, dazzling smile. "Of course it's enough, darling," she cooed to Thaddeus, her gaze sweeping over my worn furniture with unconcealed pity. "Mother Sybil is so wonderfully simple. She hardly needs anything at all." Her words, meant to confirm her own diligence, landed like a sharp stone on my soul. They didn't just dismiss my needs. They dismissed my life. In that instant, I knew. Not with proof, but with the cold, clear certainty that comes when the math doesn't add up. Thaddeus, my busy, brilliant, and heartbreakingly trusting son, had been played. And I, the quiet observer of history, was the pawn in a very expensive, ugly game. The impulse to shout, to present the facts, "No, Thaddeus, I haven't received a single cent," was overwhelming, but the professor in me, the part that understands strategy and timing, intervened. I thought, rage is momentary, precision is eternal. The sheer audacity of the lie delivered right here in my living room on a day meant to celebrate motherhood sparked a different kind of energy within me. Not the fire of anger, but the cold, steady glow of resolve. I inhaled slowly, letting the smell of Zephyra's expensive perfume mingle with the scent of my home, a stark contrast that defined the battlefield. I looked at Thaddeus, seeing only the boy who trusted me absolutely, and I knew the fault was not his, but in the woman who leveraged his trust. I managed a faint, slow smile, a mask that felt heavy on my face. "Thaddeus, darling, your thoughtfulness is truly wonderful," I whispered, keeping my voice level, perhaps a little frail, exactly what they expected. "I just want to ensure everything is running smoothly, dealing with finances at my age. Well, I must be forgetting things. I'll simply check my accounts this week." Zephyra laughed, a short, sharp, hollow sound, and gave my son's shoulder a possessive squeeze. "See, Thaddeus? Old age. She forgets the little things. Don't worry, Mother Sybil, I manage everything." She was beaming, confident that she had just secured her $48,000 right under her husband's nose, silencing the only person who could expose her. She had mistaken my patience for senility, my quiet demeanor for weakness. But as I watched her preen, the question hammered in my chest. Where did Zephyra Sterling divert the money? That single, unanswered question became the foundation of a silent, fierce commitment. It wasn't about the $48,000 anymore. It was about reclaiming the respect they thought had expired with my teaching career. They saw a frail widow. They had yet to realize they were dealing with Sybil Finch, historian. And the first rule of history is that the truth always finds a way to be documented. The game had begun, and the first move was mine. Calculated silence and a historian's vow to observe. The first wave of shock, the raw, visceral betrayal of that Mother's Day conversation, had passed. What remained was the quiet, steely resolve of a historian facing a complex forgery. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I found that justice is a dish best served meticulously documented. My background wasn't in finance, but it was in history, and history taught me that truth always leaves footprints. If you know where to look, you can trace them back to the source. So, I began my investigation, transforming my humble home office into a war room. My tool was not a sword, but a simple brown leather notebook, my truth ledger. Every interaction with Thaddeus, every saccharine call from Zephyra Sterling, every expense in my actual life, all of it was logged with the systematic rigor I once applied to deciphering ancient texts. The historian knows that the most reliable narrative is built on the smallest, most ignored facts. And Zephyra was already providing facts. The very next morning, I drove to the local bank. The teller, a kind young woman who'd known me since she was a girl, listened patiently as I explained the situation, the supposed monthly transfers of $8,000. She checked the records, tapped her keyboard, and then, slowly, shook her head. "No, Mrs. Finch. No transfers from Mr. Thaddeus Cole. Nothing. Just my usual meager pension deposit and the occasional interest payment that barely covered the cost of new checks. That visit solidified the initial certainty, transforming it from a painful suspicion into an undeniable fact. The money had not simply been delayed. It had been diverted. The problem, as I saw it, was that I was attempting to decode a modern, sophisticated financial crime, using the language of old-fashioned ledgers. I needed a translator, an expert who spoke the language of shell companies and digital transactions. I needed someone whose integrity I could trust implicitly. The man who came to mind was Darius Hale. Darius had been a colleague and a trusted friend of my late husband, a financial auditor whose reputation for meticulousness was legendary, a man who saw numbers not as arithmetic, but as a moral code. Calling Darius was difficult. It meant admitting the painful truth. My son was being robbed, and his wife was the thief. But when I finally reached him, laying out the facts with the calm, detached tone of a history lecturer, he listened without judgment. He agreed to take the case, but only on the condition of absolute confidentiality. "Sybil," he said, his voice grave, "financial deception is rarely simple. We must assume she's covered her tracks brilliantly. I won't move until I can give you absolute, irrefutable proof." His professional reserve was exactly the steady hand I needed to grasp. Darius began his work, and the feeling of anticipation was almost unbearable. He was deep in the digital weeds, tracing the invisible wires of Thaddeus's massive corporate accounts. My role became that of the patient observer. I watched, I waited, and I meticulously documented. Every time Zephyra called, always with that excessively cheerful, superior tone, I recorded the date, the time, and her exact, dismissive words. "Mother Sybil, the funds are always sent on the 1st of the month. Perhaps your memory is failing you, dear. I'm just so busy, you know, with the yacht club opening." Each entry in my truth ledger was a pinprick against the facade she worked so hard to maintain. What Darius eventually uncovered was a masterpiece of cold, calculated deception. The money was leaving Thaddeus's personal corporate account, exactly as he believed. But instead of being routed to the small community bank account I maintained, it was being sent to a separate private account. The account name wasn't mine, but it was cleverly deceptive. S. Finch Trust, which was just close enough to my name, Sybil Finch, to pass casual internal scrutiny by busy accounts payable staff. And who controlled this trust? None other than Zephyra Sterling. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She had not only stolen the money, but she had stolen my identity, or at least a financially convenient, slightly misspelled version of it. She had weaponized my son's trust and his busyness against the woman he loved most. The psychological contrast was stark. Sybil Finch, clipping coupons for generic soup, versus the phantom S. Finch Trust, paying for a life of boundless luxury. Darius began feeding me the transaction history, and the suspense was intoxicating. Each receipt, each transfer detail was a new chapter in Zephyra's selfish narrative. $48,000, intended for roof repairs and medications, had been transformed into an inventory of her vanity, a non-refundable lease deposit on a high-rise luxury apartment in the city. For her boutique office, she told Thaddeus, thousands spent on high-end art from obscure European galleries. Investments, she'd told her social circle, a startling amount for custom designer fittings and jewelry. Gifts for my social charity partners, she'd posted online. I sat there in my quiet living room, surrounded by the worn furniture and the books I cherished, looking at copies of receipts for $12,000 diamond earrings and $5,000 for a single custom velvet chaise lounge. This wasn't just stealing. This was a loud, vulgar display of contempt, contrasting her superficial excess with my necessary frugality. She had bought a new identity with the money meant to secure mine. It ignited a powerful fire in my belly, a righteous indignation that felt purer and stronger than simple rage. She had to be stopped, not just for the money, but to halt the moral decay she was spreading through my family. I needed one more anchor, a witness to my moral code, someone who understood that this was a spiritual, not just a financial, battle. I sought out Father Elias, the the gentle, white-haired priest at the community church. I didn't tell him the details of the fraud, only that I was preparing for a painful family confrontation, rooted in profound deception, and that I needed a spiritual guide to ensure I acted from a place of justice, not vengeance. Father Elias listened, his eyes wise and kind. He simply said, "Sybil, when you act to expose lies, you are doing God's work. Justice is the Lord's hand in human affairs. Your resolve is admirable." His counsel confirmed what I already felt. I was fighting to restore truth, not just bank balances. My identity had shifted from victim to prosecutor, and with Darius Hale providing the evidence and Father Elias providing the moral compass, I had assembled my own quiet, formidable team. Zephyra, meanwhile, remained obliviously arrogant. She called 2 days later, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "Mother Sybil, I am so sorry. I think your mind must be playing tricks on you. I have been bringing the money every single month. I keep it in the guest bedroom closet until I can drop it off. You must have misplaced it, dear." She was laying down a false trail, the misplaced cash defense, the classic liar's setup. I simply thanked her sweetly, recorded the precise time of the call, and wrote in my ledger, "The liar is setting the stage. Note the false narrative." My investigation became an obsession, but a calm one. I didn't rush. I knew the power of evidence. Every line item Darius sent me, every forged document detail, went into my truth ledger. The receipts for her $800 apartment lease and $3,000 in custom drapes sat side by side with my notation of the $50 in copay for my blood pressure medication and the $150 I'd been saving for the roof repair contractor. The contrast was sickening, yet supremely empowering. The very luxury that was meant to impress and intimidate was, in fact, the irrefutable evidence that would condemn her. The slow, meticulous gathering of this proof built an internal pressure, an anticipation that was almost physical. The audience for this information was no longer just me. It was Thaddeus, and ultimately, the world. I was writing the script for the inevitable confrontation, carefully choosing every word, documenting every action, knowing that when the truth finally arrived, it would do so with the force of an avalanche, one itemized receipt at a time. The time for quiet observation was nearing its end. The time for the reckoning, meticulously prepared and ruthlessly executed, was about to begin. The final pieces of the puzzle were in place, thanks to Darius. All that remained was setting the trap. The meticulous planning was complete. My notebook, the truth ledger, was closed, its pages holding the weight of undeniable facts, thanks to Darius Hale's tireless auditing. Now came the performance, the final lesson in history I had to teach my son and his wife. I decided to use the oldest, most powerful weapon in the human arsenal: domestic intimacy. What better place to expose a betrayal of the heart than at the family dining table? I planned a dinner, inviting Thaddeus, Zephyra, and crucially, Father Elias. Father Elias understood his role was silent, simply the presence of moral clarity, a non-negotiable anchor in the storm I was about to unleash. I chose the menu carefully. Slow roasted lamb, Thaddeus's absolute childhood favorite, served with creamed potatoes and garden vegetables. It was a meal steeped in genuine love and unconditional motherly care, the very antithesis of the cold, calculated greed Zephyra embodied. The contrast was deliberate, the warmth of truth versus the chilling reality of the lie. The evening began with a terrifying, almost surreal normalcy. Thaddeus, his face still etched with the pressure of the tech world, looked genuinely happy to be home, sinking into the familiar scent of my kitchen. Zephyra, of course, was flawless. A vision in a garnet-colored dress, her jewelry catching the soft candlelight, radiating an arrogance that suggested this humble house and its inhabitants were beneath her notice. She was convinced she had won, that my meek inquiries had been dismissed as the forgetfulness of old age. We moved to the dining table. The antique wood gleamed under the soft light of the candles, which cast a beautiful, warm glow over the three of us, and Father Elias, seated quietly at the end. We spoke of simple things, the church fundraiser, the unusually mild autumn weather. Zephyra, relaxed by the wine and secure in her delusion of safety, became chatty, dropping casual references to an upcoming winter trip to the Maldives, a trip Thaddeus merely nodded to, vaguely aware it was for networking. I observed her, watching the casual ease with which she wore her lie, and felt a profound, cold pity for the shallow architecture of her soul. When the conversation lulled after the main course, I set down my fork and offered a soft, gentle smile. "Thaddeus, darling, you know how difficult numbers are for me now," I began, my voice quiet and deliberately frail. "I was just looking over the last few months and you mentioned the $8,000 transfer. I'm embarrassed, but I just can't recall the exact day. I want to check with my bank to ensure it's not their system causing the issue." Zephyra immediately jumped in, her voice high and patronizing. "Oh, Mother Sybil, don't worry your head. I handle it all. It always goes out on the 1st of the month," she said, waving her diamond-encrusted hand dismissively. She said it with the confidence of someone who thought she knew the truth better than anyone else in the room. Thaddeus frowned slightly, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "The 1st, honey? I thought I set the automated transfer for the 5th. That's when my quarterly company payouts finalize, remember? I wanted the payment to reflect that day." And in that instant, the air evaporated from the room. The flickering candlelight suddenly seemed harsh. Zephyra's fixed, radiant smile didn't just waver. It shattered. Her eyes, which had been so confidently cold moments before, darted from Thaddeus to me, then to the silent figure of Father Elias. She had been caught in the crossfire of her own lie and her husband's genuine, simple truth. The tiny negligible difference between the 1st and the 5th was enough. It proved she wasn't managing the transfer because she didn't know the mechanical facts of the payment. The sudden silence was crushing, the heavy, undeniable sound of a lie being born in panic. Thaddeus, sensing the profound shift, looked from his wife's pale face to mine, his brow furrowed in confusion, not yet understanding the chasm that had just opened beneath them. "Chloe, are you sure it wasn't the 5th? Thaddeus asked, his tone still light, but laced with a nascent doubt. Zephyra forced a brittle, nervous laugh. "Of course, darling. I must have misspoke. The 5th. Yes, the 5th. Silly me, mixing up the dates. You know how busy I am." Her hands were gripping her glass, trembling slightly. The beautiful garnet dress suddenly looked less like a symbol of wealth and more like a costume she was struggling to keep on. I offered my first genuine smile of the night, a smile of cold, quiet control. "Don't worry, dear. I understand. I just want to ensure that if there was any confusion, we resolve it now, before more time passes." I then stood up, signaling the end of the main act. "But before dessert," I announced, keeping my gaze steady on Zephyra, "I had one small final guest I wanted to introduce." The psychological tension in the room was unbearable. Zephyra looked physically ill. Thaddeus was simply lost. The dramatic irony was at its peak. The audience, and Sybil, knew exactly what was coming, while Zephyra clung desperately to the hope that her quick pivot had saved her. The side door to the kitchen opened, and Darius Hale stepped into the light. He wasn't dressed in a suit, but a simple, practical blazer, and he carried nothing but a slim manila envelope. His presence was not that of an investigator, but of an immutable fact. Darius Hale, I introduced him calmly. A trusted family friend and a financial auditor. He was simply passing through, and I asked him to clarify a small accounting discrepancy for me. Zephyra sprang from her chair, her mask completely gone. An auditor? Mother Sybil, this is ridiculous. You are making a scene over a simple date mix-up. Thaddeus, tell her to stop. Her voice was no longer saccharine. It was raw. Shrill panic. Thaddeus, seeing the look on Darius's face and the envelope in his hand, finally grasped the true nature of the evening. His eyes were wide with a crushing, agonizing realization. Darius, without emotion, laid the concise file on the table, directly in front of Thaddeus. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice quiet but authoritative, "I was asked to trace the $8,000 monthly transfers from your corporate account, designated for Mrs. Sybil Finch. They were transferred exactly on the 5th, as you stated. Unfortunately, they did not reach Mrs. Finch." He opened the file to a single page, pointing. The funds were transferred directly to an account opened under the name S. Finch Trust. This account, however, is controlled exclusively by Mrs. Zephyra Sterling. The evidence of direct fund transfer and the corresponding luxury expenditure receipts for jewelry, art, and an expensive lease are detailed here. The sound of Thaddeus breathing was the loudest thing in the room. He didn't speak. He stared at the page, the figures, the bold, undeniable lines of transfer. The man who managed billions suddenly couldn't reconcile $8,000 of betrayal. He was forced to confront his wife's calculated crime and his own foolish, devastating trust. All at once. The shame was palpable, a physical weight settling on his shoulders. "Clara! Zephyra!" Thaddeus stammered, his voice breaking. Is this true?" Zephyra burst into hysterical dry sobs. They weren't tears of guilt, but of rage at her failure to deceive. I was going to pay it back. I just borrowed it temporarily." "It was a mistake. You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she screamed, turning her fury not on her victim, but on the evidence. Father Elias, until now a silent witness, spoke in a low, unwavering tone. "Zephyra, lying about the date is a mistake. Forging documents and diverting necessary funds from an elderly woman is not a mistake. It is theft, and it is a profound betrayal." I looked at my son, whose eyes, moments ago full of life, were now hollowed out by the agonizing clarity of the moment. He had lost his wife, his security, and his self-respect in the space of 3 sentences. "The mistake," I said softly, my eyes meeting Zephyra's as she scrabbled for an exit, "was that you mistook my silence for weakness. You thought a simple professor couldn't read numbers. But history always records the truth." Zephyra's final act was one of pure, unadulterated narcissism. "Fine! Believe the old woman. You're a fool, Thaddeus, both of you." She snatched her bag and ran, the sound of her expensive heels striking the wooden floor like hammer blows, each step a final, decisive declaration of guilt. Thaddeus remained seated, his head bowed over Darius's file, shaking. The lamb dinner, the symbol of motherly love, now sat untouched, eclipsed by the rancid scent of shattered trust. I realized that achieving justice meant shattering my son's marriage and forcing him into a pain I never wished on him. And the question I pose to you, the viewer, now, is a simple one of engagement and moral positioning. If you were Thaddeus, facing that irrefutable file and that immediate hostile flight, would you leave immediately, run from the reality, or would you find the strength right then to fight for the truth that remained? The immediate wreckage was complete. The truth had arrived, uninvited and unwelcome, but totally undeniable. The dinner table, once the scene of such profound betrayal, was quiet again. The moment Zephyra's heels vanished down the driveway, taking her calculated fury with her, the air in my home changed. It became heavy with silence, a silence filled not with anger, but with the quiet sound of a heart breaking. Thaddeus's heart, shattered by the reality of his wife's calculated crime and his own willful blindness. Legal matters, once the truth was exposed, moved swiftly. Darius Hale, with his meticulous evidence, handed the case over to an attorney who specialized in financial fraud. There was no need for a protracted, messy public battle. The proof was irrefutable. Zephyra's immediate departure was, in itself, an admission of guilt. In a matter of weeks, the legal system confirmed the debt and the repayment of the $48,000. The money meant for my care and comfort was secured. It arrived not as a joyful windfall, but as a cold, necessary correction. I looked at the number in my account, the digital proof of the recovered funds, and felt no triumph. The money itself had been tainted by greed and lies. Keeping it solely for my own use felt wrong. I realized that the true lesson of this ordeal was not about solvency, but about purpose. My pain had to be converted into something meaningful, something that actively fought the very injustice I had endured. That is the first step in reclaiming your own narrative, refusing to let the trauma define you. I called Darius and Father Elias. We sat in the sunny garden among the jasmine and the lavender, and I laid out my plan. This money, I told them, is poisoned if I simply spend it on a new roof. It must be a weapon for justice. And so the Finch Legacy Fund was born, dedicated to supporting seniors in our community who had been victimized by family financial fraud. It was a simple act, transforming stolen capital into social purpose, but it felt like the most profound act of ownership I had ever performed. The financial recovery was complete. The spiritual recovery was just beginning. Yet, as the foundation took shape, renting a small office near the church, setting up files and a mission statement, the silence from my son remained a heavy presence in my life. Thaddeus was dealing with the catastrophic wreckage of his marriage, the humiliation of being publicly fooled, and the deep shame of realizing his own success had shielded him from reality. He needed time to process the betrayal, not just of his mother, but of himself. I understood this. I knew that forgiveness is not something demanded, it is something earned, and sometimes the road to earning it starts with long periods of silence. But the silence was unnerving. Every time the phone rang, every time a car slowed outside, I held my breath. I wanted him to heal, but I desperately needed him to return, not as the billionaire CEO, but as the son who once believed my every word. The final emotional resolution came on a rainy Tuesday evening, months after the confrontation. The rain was cold and heavy, lashing against the windows of my historic home. I was reading by the fireplace when I heard a hesitant, soft knock, not the confident demand of a busy man, but the tentative plea of someone utterly lost. I opened the door, and there stood Thaddeus Cole. He was utterly drenched, his expensive jacket soaked, his face raw and weary. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful tech magnate. He was just my little boy, standing in the rain, trembling. He stepped inside and sank onto my old sofa, his powerful shoulders shaking. He didn't look at me. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracked with exhaustion. I lost everything. She took what was left. I deserved it, but I'm so sorry. I let her insult you, let her starve you. I trusted the wrong person." I knelt beside him, doing what a mother does best. I wiped the rain from his face and covered him with a soft, worn blanket. I didn't offer immediate, easy absolution. True forgiveness is earned through honest pain. I simply said, "Thaddeus, get up, son. Your mother doesn't need your apology. Your dignity does." The mistake wasn't trusting her. The mistake was staying silent when you saw the first sign of darkness. He looked up at me, his eyes searching, desperate for a path back. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for Zephyra. He was asking for atonement for his own blindness. And there, in the firelight, I saw the man I had raised. Not the CEO, but the human being who knew how to admit profound failure. I told him about the Finch Legacy Fund, about the mission to help others endure the same betrayal. I saw a spark flicker behind the pain in his eyes. He found his purpose in my purpose. "Mom," he asked, his voice steadying, "can I help? Not with money, with work. I want to volunteer. I want to use my skills, my focus, to help your mission." I didn't hesitate. "Come on Saturday, Thaddeus. Father Elias will be glad to see you. We have files to organize, and more importantly, people who need to be believed." From that day forward, Thaddeus showed up every weekend. He started quietly, organizing the finances of the small foundation, applying his billion-dollar analytical mind to securing dignity for strangers. It was a profound act of resolution. The betrayal had been corrected. Now the character had to be rebuilt. I watched him sit at the desk, focused, humble, and kind to the elderly clients who came in, and I realized my true victory had nothing to do with the $48,000. My victory was watching my son, the tech billionaire, choose the quiet, moral work of serving the forgotten over the noise of the market. My victory was witnessing the reclamation of his character and dignity. The final thesis of this entire journey, the single truth I learned, is this: the greatest victory is not the money recovered, but the dignity that is reclaimed and taught. Zephyra took money and gave us a lesson. She shattered trust, but in doing so, forced us to rebuild something stronger, purer, and more valuable. So, if you are sitting there tonight dealing with a fracture of trust, a betrayal that cuts deep, remember Sybil Finch. You may lose the money, you may lose the time, but you never have to lose your dignity. Do not seek revenge. Seek purpose. Do not seek pity. Seek justice. Turn the poison of their betrayal into the purpose of your foundation, and when the one you love returns, broken and humbled, accept them, not with judgment, but with the quiet, powerful strength of a mother who knows that the most important thing in life is not holding on, but learning how to rise again. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope my experience teaches you that when faced with a lie, your sharpest tool is always the unwavering light of the truth. If this message resonated with you, if you have faced similar struggles, share your story below. Let your voice be the legacy that helps someone else find their way home.